Welcome back to another episode of Rock Boys Football Dill. One of the more exciting week 2 matchups that, I think is just flying under the radar because you have games like Texas, Michigan, Tennessee, NC State, neutral site, Charlotte. These are two programs that many of y'all know I've been extremely high on during this offseason. Now, two teams that kind of look different week 1, right? Tennessee looks the part, NC State, not so much. You said this before we went live that you got to be careful reading into some of these sleepy week 1 FCS matchups, right? For Tennessee, they looked amazing. NC State, not so much. I still really like both of these teams heading into this matchup. Want to get into some key players, some key matchups, obviously give our game predictions now before we get into it. As always, just want to say thank you to you guys. And we took a look at this game, about 2 months ago, just kind of looking at some early intriguing matchups of the college football season. The amount of support, the amount of feedback, it was absolutely amazing. We can't thank you guys enough. If you all do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel. Much more importantly, let it fly in the comment section. Whether you agree with the boys, whether you disagree, drop in your game predictions. Let it fly. That's the best part about doing these kind of things. And Dill, without further ado, I think you got to start with this Tennessee offense that looked phenomenal week 1 against an NC State defense that I just blindly trust to be really, really good, right? Tony Gibson, Dave Doran, they do a phenomenal job developing defenses. Let's look at that matchup and say, what does NC State need to do to slow down a Tennessee offense that just looks to be extremely dynamic heading into this football game here?
I mean, honestly, I think people want to talk about Nico and kind of stopping him. I think fundamentally, if you're going to stop Tennessee, you need to be able to stop their rushing attack. And that, again, you look at that offensive line, really, really good. But I think you've seen NC State do a really good job in the past, not only making young quarterbacks look very pedestrian, but also they've done a good job playing physical. I think they have the guys to do it. I still am a big fan of Brandon Cleveland, Davin Van. They have really good defensive linemen. And I do think it's worth pointing out they lost their middle linebacker, Fordham, pretty much right when that game started to a targeting call. He's a big piece of what they have. They obviously had to replace what they were losing with Wilson.
Peyton Wilson was a dude.
So they had to replace him, and it was going to be a lot on Fordham's shoulders. And to not have him for the whole game, I think you saw them rip some big runs on that team, whether it was the quarterback or running back. I think having him back will be big. And I also think, again, this is a team that's typically been physically right, exactly kind of where you want them to be.
Yeah, if there's one thing we trust about NC State's defense, it is physical at the point of attack. And one of the keys that I have in my notes is, can NC State stop the run with the light box? Because if you do want to start walking safeties into the box, you have guys that can work vertically down the throat. And I think down the field, I should say. I think more notably, Nico showed that ability to consistently push the ball down the field on a more consistent basis than Joe Milton did in 2023. When you talk about, hey, Thornton looked awesome. This was a guy that I was banging the table for 12 months ago. It's great to see him back. Brew McCoy, Brazel, a lot of different kind of pass catchers that can work vertically down the field. But I think you said it best. You look at this Tennessee offense, it does start with the run game. This is a veteran, good offensive line with really good running backs. Dylan Sampson had himself a day against Chattanooga.
That's what I'll be looking for when you talk veteran offensive lines. I feel like that is an element also of how NC State slows teams down as they play that 3-3-5 kind of look, and they come from everywhere. And I think sometimes offensive lines struggle to pick that kind of scheme up.
Yeah, it disrupts the blocking scheme significantly.
In Tennessee, you've seen do a really, really good job. I think that unit, having played together for so long, being as talented as they are, they've done, I feel like, a pretty good job of avoiding allowing run through and penetration. So that'll be kind of what I'm looking for. Again, I think physically, I don't think NC State's just going to roll over and get rolled off the ball for them. But I think they are going to need to create those negative plays and do some of those things you've seen them do to slow down a lot of their ACC foes.
You got to try to get Nico uncomfortable, which is a lot easier said than done. I mean, this is a kid that is only a second-year college football player, but you talk about confidence and moxie, like this kid lacks zero of that. One other thing that I think NC State might be able to do, and you said historically has done a good job of, in terms of making young quarterbacks look pedestrian, I believe the word you used, like changing the picture, right? You look at this Tennessee offense, it's a lot of pre-snap reads, right? It's like, hey, I'm looking at this kind of defense. This is where I'm going with the football. Can NC State change the picture late, kind of confuse Nico? That's kind of one of the big storylines because, again, Tony Gibson does a phenomenal job doing that. And you talk about the different alignments they use, that could potentially cause Nico some problems. And I think finally for NC State, I think you got to accept that this Tennessee team is going to move the football. You got to play good in the red zone. This is a Tennessee team that, again, I have a hard time seeing them just completely get shut out. So when they start moving the football, can you get gritty in the red zone, hold them to 3, keep yourself in this game from a defensive standpoint? Probably the last key to the game that I'm looking at for this NC State defense.
Yeah, and that's obviously always important, but especially for those teams that, again, Tennessee's not been quite as explosive as they were in the past, or I think almost as people perceive it. I mean, they're very methodical. They march on teams. I think, again, last year they weren't explosive for a couple of different reasons. That's something, frankly, I think I'm looking for from Tennessee is can they get back to hitting some of those big plays? Because that does, obviously, if you hit big plays, you don't necessarily need to worry about scoring in the red zone. So that's something I think I'll be very much keyed in on is with this healthier and younger and talented wide receiver core, along with a quarterback who feels far more capable than Joe Milton. Can they get back to hitting some of those big plays like they were hitting with
and on a consistent basis? And you saw that from Nico. We kind of knew we were going to see that. He was 22 of 28. He was completing 70% of his balls 10 plus yards down the field. I mean, that's just completely a 180 from what you got with Joe Milton. I think the consistency that he brings this Tennessee offense, that's a massive storyline coupled with just, I think, kind of an elite wide receiver. And again, it sounds like we hate Nico because we give love to so much other this Tennessee team, but you look at the rest of this Tennessee team, yes, Nico we think is going to be an exceptional quarterback, really good offensive line, talented running back room, difference makers on the outside. It's a lot more to this Tennessee offense than just the quarterback, and I think that's what makes this offense so good. Now, Dill, flipping the sides, the one key for NC State, you got to stay on schedule. Because I think what we saw, and we kind of knew this coming in, Grayson McCall, there's a reason he's been as productive at the college football level, but not going to the NFL. He doesn't have necessarily an NFL arm. And when you saw NC State struggle with the run game early, get behind the chains, you saw the limitations that Grayson McCall had in terms of the throws that NC State's offense can ask him to make. You look at what caveat is I still think Grayson McCall is a quarterback that NC State can win at a very high level with, but you got to play to his strengths, and that is get the run game going, stay on schedule, keep those throws for Grayson McCall, kind of those throws that are in his wheelhouse. He's an exceptionally accurate quarterback, over a career 70% completion percentage, but you got to keep him out of those 3rd and 8+ situations because that is when he struggles and is limited as a quarterback.
And that was the real disappointing part I thought of that Western Carolina game was that offensive line really took a bit of time to get rolling. And they did eventually. I thought they started to rip off some big runs with Jordan Waters. But for really the first half and maybe into that third quarter, it was pretty choppy with what they were doing. And that's an offensive line that, again, when you return that many guys, and I don't think they were great last year, but they were young, you're returning a lot of guys, and I think there's a lot of talent there. You love, obviously, belting some of those guys, but they need to make it happen. This is going to be a big bounce back game for that unit because at the end of the day, I think you're right. If they can't get that run game going, Grayson McCall's just not in a great position to cut that team up because he really doesn't have the whole field to work with.
Yeah, I mean, he can cut you up, but he can cut you up playing within like the scope of his game. And again, what is not in the scope of his game is really pushing the ball down the field or to the boundary. Like you got to keep him on schedule and ask him to make the throws that he can make at a high level. We've seen him make at a high level going back to Coastal Carolina. Dill, I think the last thing for NC State, and you kind of said it, like you got to play the game on your terms here. Like this is a Tennessee team that wants this to look a little bit of like a track.
I mean, fast against Chattanooga too.
Yeah, and kind of what I'm like. NC State, this is how NC State wins in the ACC, right? They grind teams down, they control the clock, control the time possession. If you're beating Tennessee in this football game, that is what it's looking like for NC State. I think NC State has the firepower to, put a lot of points up on the board, but you don't want to get into a track meet with Tennessee. I don't think there's many teams in the country that want to play Tennessee in a track meet kind of game. So if you're NC State, time of possession, stay on schedule, play on your terms. That's kind of the avenue to winning. You look at Tennessee's defense still, a Tennessee defense that doesn't get enough credit. I think a really good front seven. I think the big storyline we're all talking about is really two things. One, can Tennessee stop the run? That's going to be the biggest question mark. And NC State didn't inspire a ton of confidence that they can consistently run on this Tennessee defense. And I think more importantly, how do you take away Kevin Concepcion? This is one of the more special players in all of college football. You have some other weapons at NC State, right? Noah Rogers flashed. Justin Jolie, the transfer from UConn, certainly flashed. That being said, you make no mistake about it. Their best player on offense is still Kevin Concepcion. He's still a guy that is going to be their difference maker. What does Tennessee have in the bag to deal with Kevin Concepcion? Probably something you're looking at here.
And that's almost, I mean, I don't think we've ever seen Tennessee corners do much following around. I mean, you obviously see guys like Jabbar Muhammad or Will Johnson from Michigan. I mean, those guys will follow big time wide receivers around. That is something I think you're kind of looking for, because I think there's an element, at least from the outside, that I look at Jermod McCoy. He does feel like he is not better, not necessarily much better than any other cornerback in this Tennessee team. I think Ricky Gibson's a very good player, but
he's
is
the best.
far more proven. And I think, like, how much load do you put on him to say, all right, we're going to take this guy away, and then we're going to deal with everyone else with the rest of our back end? It's not something we've seen from Tennessee. I'm not necessarily sure they go to it, but I do think at the end of the day, if Jermod McCoy can shoulder a fair amount of responsibility to take Concepcion away, and he can do it and kind of limit him in what he does, because you're not going to stop him. I mean, he's going to get his do a really good job of getting him touches. But he has taken games by, like,
one of the things I'm interested in, especially with the injury concerns at that nickel spot for Tennessee, is can NC State, get creative and get Kevin Concepcion on some matchups, because that is how NC State had nobody else last year, and they knew it was Kevin Concepcion. What they did was just get really creative. Like, we're going to put him in the slot, we're going to put him on the boundary, we're going to put him in the backfield. I would expect NC State to do that and try to get him some of those matchups with maybe some more inexperienced guys in the back end. That'll be something that I'm looking for. All right, Dale, let's get into the pick. Line's kind of bounced around, opened up at 4.5. Believe at times it was down to 2.5 during the offseason. Back up to 6.5. A little bit of a reaction in terms of what we saw week one. I'll put you on the floor first. Who you got in this matchup?
I love Tennessee to win this game, and I think if this line stays in that 6.5 range, I like Tennessee. But if it goes to 7, I take NC State for sure.
Really?
I still don't think that, again, they didn't play a great week one game. That quarterback hit some big plays. They got stuffed on some 4th and 1s. I think if you watch that game, it probably wasn't as bad as it kind of felt in the moment, because it was obviously close in a sense. I mean, that NC State team's still no joke. I love their defense. They do a really, really good job, as I kind of said, of confusing quarterbacks. I think they have a chance to, again, take the ball away a little bit, possibly make some of those plays on defense. And I'm still comfortable with this offense. I think they do have the weapons to do it. I think if that game goes plus outside of that 7-point spread, I really like NC State.
Yeah, and the NC State fans know I am a massive fan of this team. I think, especially in the scope of the ACC right now, like Clemson getting the doors blown off, you look at Florida State struggling early. Like, I think this NC State team is a legit threat to go win an ACC title. But give me the Vols. Like, I look at Tennessee and say I just think they're getting to that point where they're almost one of those juggernauts. Like, where do you attack this Tennessee team, right? They run the football phenomenally well, have a good offensive line. I'm a believer in Nico, especially with the wide receivers. And then I think this defense is extremely underrated. And you look at NC State, Tennessee was one of the best rushing defenses in the country last year, specifically in the SEC. I struggled to see NC State successfully and efficiently running the football. 3rd and long is not a place you want to live in with this Tennessee team. 1, because Grace McCall is not comfortable there. 2, because Tennessee can get after the passer. For those reasons, give me Tennessee. Feel pretty good about it, which means probably bad things, but we'll see. Again, appreciate you guys rocking with the fellas. If y'all do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel. Let it fly in the comments section, and we'll talk to y'all later.